Hello, thank you for the chance to speak. My name is Fred Salvucci. I've met with you all before. I guess a couple of points I'd like to raise. Number one, Tony Disidoro has a proposal on the table for a study of bus service in Brighton. I use that service every day, just about. It's a good service when it's working. It's very tough when it's not. Especially this time of year, waiting for the bus isn't fun. So I urge that you favorably look at Tony's proposal. Secondly, on the Alston interchange, I'd like to thank you for extending the comment period. It gave us a chance to get comments in, but I want to urge you to shift dynamic on that. If it's business as usual, the past year has been spent with a lot of very talented and hardworking engineers, in my view, working hard to attempt to shine a sneaker. The proposed preferred alternative does not work, in my view. I don't believe it actually fits. At least the 600 pages do not demonstrate that it physically fits. The key cross-sections are not there that we requested several times. So I think you can't even draw it, let alone build it. But even more significantly, I believe it's impossible to build. There was a reason for meeting that challenge when it was believed that it was necessary to provide freight service to Houghton Chemical. So the MassDOT staff worked very hard to try to make a rebuilding of the viaduct in place work. Houghton has relinquished their need for freight service, so that reason is not there. If you adopt the ABC proposal for an at-grade solution, it's $100 million less than the viaduct rebuild, and it's buildable, which is the really significant thing. And that $100 million could be much better used redressing the horrible errors that were embedded in the turnpike a half a century ago when it was originally built. In fairness to the people 50 years ago, and I don't feel like being fair to them because they were pretty nasty, but it was an era when the Commonwealth's economy was in terrible trouble, when they didn't have federal money, when there were no federal laws about protecting the environment, and there were no environmental justice rules. It's not much of an excuse. They could have been decent instead of indecent, but there were no laws telling them to behave differently. Today, we've got a hot economy. We've got environmental laws. You've been complying with them. I'm urging that the next step should not be to put more engineering time into issue by issue playing ping pong on what was put into the record, but rather to shift to the at-grade solution and rectify the flaws in the current preferred alignment and get moving, because as you've all pointed out several times, that viaduct is in very bad shape and needs to be rebuilt, and we don't have the time for business as usual. I would urge you, I know people have requested time on the regular schedule to discuss this. I would urge you to make time for that either at the next joint meeting or the one after, when people could be available for questions and answers, because we think that you could move to a much more expedited process of processing a project which is truly buildable. In the meanwhile, I would urge you to take have an independent look taken on the constructability that I believe is fundamentally not there. I'll give one example of that. The toughest piece of this job, as proposed in the preferred alternative, is to rebuild a viaduct that's over active rail tracks. That's a very tough thing to do. To make it worse, the only laydown area of significance for the contractor is 1/3 of a mile to the west on the other side of active tracks. If you don't give reasonable construction conditions to contractors in a design-build job, you either get no bids or you get very high bids. You've seen that bad movie before on the Green Line, and I congratulate you for going back and making that project buildable and getting us onto a track. I think we should learn from that experience and not waste a lot of time this year rebutting, but shift the preferred alternative to one that's buildable and gives you $100 million to address other problems like the miserable conditions on the riverfront and the lack of public transportation, permeability of the site. Those are problems that never should have been there, but they've been there for 50 years. This is the chance to fix them, and you actually can fix them and get a new structurally sound highway and rail system in place for less money than the current preferred alternative. I urge that you take that look and that you provide an opportunity for people to discuss that. Thanks very much for the chance to speak. I'll cheat one more time. That ramp that was just referred to for the Silver Line to get into the Ted Williams Tunnel, I wrote the environmental impact report on that when I was a MassDOT board member. That, you can look it up in the documentation. That ramp was always supposed to be the way the Silver Line got to the Ted Williams Tunnel. The current mishmash where you're almost back to South Station before you get in, it is a terrible insult to the riders, and it's time to fix it. So I'd certainly support the comment that that ought to be fixed. Thanks for the chance to speak.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who did not?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking. I'm off your agenda, but I just wanted to commend you for the open process that you conducted on the I-90 interchange project. We now have, by rumor at least, more comments on this project than the MEP has ever seen before. So I think the open and deliberative process that you conducted with the task force was magnificent. I'm hoping that that will continue as you go into the very next phases of whatever MEPA sets up for the tasks that are to be done in the next phase. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next.
Good afternoon, Secretary Pollock, members of the board. Like Bob Sloan, wanted to thank you for the opportunity to comment on the I-90 Alston DEIR. The handout is a few of the many comments that you've received on the project that I think are indicative of the really huge amount of work that's really urgently needed on this project to move it forward. You can see there are comments both from Harvard, BU, the city of Brookline, and Newton. There'll be hundreds of other comments of similar vein, and there hasn't been. I guess the question is, when will we start to really re-engage in terms of a public and working meeting process, which there wasn't as much of during 2017, but seems like is really needed in 2018 to move the project ahead. Are there any?
We don't traditionally get into a question response, so
we'll take that question to the board and to the staff, but we don't answer questions.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to your response. Thank you.
Thank you.